Hello, everybody. It's Walter, your favorite historian, educator, professor, social studies extraordinaire, and blue collar scholar. Today's date is November 3rd, 2025. This video is entitled Early State Constitutions, Gubernatorial Selection. So, after the Declaration of Independence was adopted in 1776, all of the original 13 states either adopted their first constitutions between 1776 and 1780, or significantly modified their colonial charters into new frameworks of government. Most adopted new constitutions and established the Republican form of government that we're all familiar with today, with an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch, all with varying powers to check one another and ensure that no branch became too powerful. So, aside from this basic blueprint, these constitutions varied greatly on the powers granted to each branch, as well as the structures of their court systems, the times of elections, the terms of office for all of the statewide elected officials and local officials. It varied based on suffrage requirements and many more things, okay? So the chief executive of these states, held in the form of a governor, in most of them, except Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, where it was known as a president supported by a council, is one of those features where the selection measure of that individual varied from place to place. Unlike today, in which the voters elect their state governor, in these times, in 8 of the original 13 states, the legislature chose the governor, not the people. So those states were as follows: New Hampshire, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Okay. Now, how that worked specifically was that an individual likely would be nominated, or several individuals would likely be nominated for the post of governor, and they would have rounds of balloting until it was finally weeded down to about 2, and whoever received the most votes would become the new governor, okay? And this person was chosen by a joint ballot of both houses of the state legislature. Upon being selected as governor by the state legislature, they would then resign their seat in the legislature and become a full-time governor. So what you're seeing here is this individual who is the new governor, every time there's an election cycle, coming directly from the legislature itself, okay? And thereby, what we're having here is a quasi-parliamentary style system in these early states. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing strange about that. And this was the way it went in many states for quite some time after the adoption of these original constitutions. In my own state of Maryland, that was the way the governor was selected all the way until the year 1837. So you're talking about 60 years after the adoption of Maryland's original state constitution in November of 1776, a document which, by the way, was not submitted to the voters for their approbation in any way, shape, or form. It was hastily drawn up and then submitted to the people as their new law, okay? They were not given the chance to approve it or not. Okay, so that's how it worked back then. In many of the other states, the new constitution, first after independence, was submitted to the voters for their approval. That was not the case in Maryland. Again, the legislature just drew it up and said, people of Maryland, this is your new constitution, like it or not. So in the other states, all right, the voters chose the governor. Now, more on that in a second. Those other states were as follows. This is only a minority of the states, however: Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, and Georgia. Now, when I say the voters, I am not talking about all of the people of the state. I am talking about those who, in these times, met the property requirements to be able to cast ballots in the first place. So, as I continue to make the argument, America was not formed as a broad, encompassing democracy where everybody was able to participate in the body politic. Indeed, the body politic was restricted to primarily white land-owning males. Now, interestingly enough, in these early state constitutions, in most of them, there was no active color bar, which means African American men and men of any other race, theoretically, who satisfied the property requirements would legally be able to cast ballots. Now, whether they were actually able to do that is a different story for another day. But on paper, legally, according to the law, they were able to do so, including my own state of Maryland. All right, there was no active color bar in the state constitution. That was not everywhere, but it was like this in many states. Okay, there were basic minimum property requirements to be able to cast ballots for governor, as well as to vote for members of the state legislature. And these requirements were typically not that low. All right, and the whole purpose of that was to ensure that power remained in the hands of the minority elite of landowners. Okay, the landowners, the aristocracy, were and remain a minority. Okay, the wealthiest creme de la creme remain a minority to this very day. Okay, and the originators of these constitutions, most of them, wanted to ensure that power remained in the hands of a few, not a broad encompassing system. A broad democracy is like people want to make the argument that everybody gets to participate, where essentially the middle and poorer classes would be the majority and therefore in control of things, and therefore would likely institute reforms that would be contrary to the wishes of that elite minority. So in drawing up these constitutions, suffrage was typically limited to landowners, a very powerful minority, to ensure that their interests remained paramount and they got to control society. Women were only allowed to cast ballots in one state, New Jersey, if they met the property requirements. Okay, no other state were women allowed to cast ballots. So even in the states where the voters could choose the governor, all right, that suffrage was limited to typically the most well-to-do men in society. And even if it was allowed for men who were not fabulously well-to-do, they still had to satisfy a certain minimum property requirement in order to vote for the new governor. All right, and so that's how it was back then. There was no place where you had a governor elected by the voters where everybody was able to participate in political society. That did not exist just yet. We were still decades and decades away from that. All right. And in my own Maryland, again, the legislature chose the governor until 1837. At that time, a constitutional amendment was added that provided for popular election of the state governor. And even then, we had a weird system whereby the governor would be elected from one of several districts in the state every election cycle. So one election cycle, it might be the Western Shore. The next election cycle, it might be Central Maryland, then Southern Maryland, then the Eastern Shore, and only the people in that particular district that happened to be the election cycle for that particular time period, only people of that district would get to cast a ballot for governor. That's the dumbest mess I've ever heard. So it would not be until the year 1868 when we adopted our Constitution of 1867 after the Civil War that Maryland actually, for once, for the first time in its history, would have an election where all eligible voters of the state, all right, would theoretically be able to participate. All men, essentially, regardless of color. Of course, women were not allowed to vote until the 20th century in Maryland. So it's really weird how we've gone, how far we've come, and how restricted the ballot was in its early days. But if you understand context, you understand that they wanted to keep power in the hands of the elite and not allow it in the hands of the vast majority of common people of the day. All right. And of course, restrictions were based on race as well as thus economic status. Power had to be concentrated in the hands of the elite, so the governor would be chosen either by the legislature or the creme de la creme, the wealthiest of society. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll be happy to have good civil discussion with you. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next video. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like the video and share. Talk to you at the next one. Professor Shelton, out.